In 1857, a telegraph lineman walked into a blacksmith shop on the west side of Chicago, carrying a broken pair of pliers. The handles had cracked, the jaws were still good, but the tool was useless without a second half. He did not want a new pair, he wanted the old pair fixed. The blacksmith was a German immigrant named Mathias Klein. He had arrived in the United States from Germany and settled in Chicago, where he opened a small forging operation. He repaired tools, he made parts. He worked iron the way his trade had taught him, one piece at a time, heated, hammered, shaped by hand. Klein looked at the broken pliers. He forged a new half. He fitted it to the surviving, original half. The tool worked. The lineman went back to stringing telegraph wire across the Illinois prairie. Months later, the original half broke. The lineman came back. Klein forged the second half. Now both halves were Klein's. The entire tool was his. Every piece of metal in the pliers had been shaped in his shop, fitted to the hand of a man who climbed wooden poles for a living and needed a tool that would not fail 40 feet above the ground. That pair of pliers was not a product launch. It was not a business plan. It was a blacksmith solving one man's problem twice. But the tool that came out of that second forging was the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. It was the first pair of Klein pliers, and the industry it helped build did not yet exist. The United States in the 1850s was a country being connected by wire. The telegraph had arrived. Samuel Morse's first successful transmission between Washington and Baltimore in 1844 had proven that messages could travel faster than horses, faster than trains, faster than anything human beings had ever built. Within a decade, telegraph companies were racing to string wire across the continent. Poles went up along railway lines, cables stretched across rivers. By 1861, the first transcontinental telegraph line reached San Francisco. The Pony Express, which had operated for 18 months, shut down 2 days later. The wire made the rider obsolete. Every mile of that wire required a man to climb a pole, strip insulation, twist conductors, and fasten connections by hand. The tool he used more than any other was a pair of side-cutting pliers. The pliers gripped wire, twisted it, cut it, and pulled it tight. A lineman without pliers was a man standing on a pole with nothing to do. The pliers available in the 1850s were not built for this work. They were general-purpose blacksmith tools, forged for shops and benches, designed for intermittent use on stable ground. A telegraph lineman used them 8 hours a day, in rain, in wind, in freezing cold, on a wooden crossarm 30 feet in the air, with nothing between him and the ground except the strength of his grip. The pliers broke, they slipped, the jaws lost alignment. The cutting edges dulled after weeks of constant use on copper and iron wire. Mathias Klein's pliers did not break. The lineman who brought the original pair back had not come because Klein's work failed. He came because the original manufacturer's work failed. Klein's forged half had outlasted the factory half. That was the information that mattered. Word spread the way information moved among working tradespeople in the 19th century. One lineman told another. A foreman saw the tool on a belt and asked where it came from. A crew ordered 6 pairs, then 12. Klein was not advertising, he was not marketing. He was forging pliers in a Chicago shop, 1 pair at a time, and the men who used them kept coming back because the tools survived the work. By the 1860s, Klein's shop was producing pliers specifically designed for the telegraph lineman's hand. The geometry was not accidental. Klein studied how the men held the tool, how they twisted wire, how they pulled slack, how they cut conductors at awkward angles while balanced on a crossarm. The pliers were shaped to the task. The pivot point was engineered for leverage. The handles were long enough to generate force without fatiguing the hand over a full shift. The cutting edges were hardened to stay sharp through thousands of cuts on copper and iron. This was not factory production. This was a blacksmith iterating on a design through direct contact with the people who used it. Every pair that came back for repair taught Klein something about how the tool failed. Every conversation with a lineman taught him something about how the tool was used. The feedback loop between maker and user was immediate, physical, and continuous. In 1867, the company incorporated formally. Mathias Klein continued to run the operation. The product line did not diversify. Klein made pliers, that was it. While other tool manufacturers spread into hammers, wrenches, saws, and general hardware, Klein stayed on one product category: pliers, specifically pliers for the men who worked with wire. In October 1871, the Great Chicago Fire destroyed roughly 17,000 structures across 3.5 square miles of the city. The fire burned for 2 days. It killed an estimated 300 people. It left more than 100,000 residents homeless. Entire commercial districts were reduced to ash. Hundreds of businesses vanished overnight. Klein's shop survived. The location on the west side, outside the fire's main path, kept the forges and the tools intact. While much of Chicago was rebuilding from nothing, Klein was still operating, and the rebuilding itself created demand. Telegraph lines that had burned needed to be restrung. New buildings needed wiring. The infrastructure that Chicago was reconstructing from the ground up required exactly the kind of skilled wire work that Klein's tools were built for. The decision to stay narrow looked limiting. It was strategic. The telegraph industry was growing, the telephone was coming. Alexander Graham Bell's patent was filed in 1876. Thomas Edison was building power stations. The demand for wire workers was about to explode, and every one of them would need the tool that Klein had spent 2 decades perfecting. On September 4th, 1882, Edison's Pearl Street Station in Lower Manhattan switched on the first commercial electrical power system in the United States. It powered 800 incandescent lamps across a 1 square mile district. The system ran on direct current. It required enormous quantities of copper wire, strung through conduits, fastened to insulators, connected at junction points, all of it handled by men with tools in their hands. The electrical age did not begin with a consumer product. It began with infrastructure. Wires had to be run, poles had to be climbed, connections had to be made, and every connection required pliers. The 1880s and 1890s saw an explosion of electrical construction across the United States. Edison's direct current competed with George Westinghouse's alternating current. Tesla's polyphase system won. Long-distance transmission became possible. Power lines stretched from generating stations to cities, from cities to towns, from towns to farms. The grid was being built by hand. 1 pole, 1 wire, 1 connection at a time. The men who did this work were called linemen. They climbed wooden poles wearing leather belts and steel gaffs strapped to their boots. They worked in weather that would close a factory. Rain, ice, wind, summer heat that turned the cross arms into branding irons. A fall from a pole could kill. A live wire could kill faster. The mortality rate among electrical linemen in the late 19th century was among the highest of any trade in the country. These men chose their tools the way a surgeon chooses instruments, not by brand loyalty in the modern marketing sense, but by survival instinct. A tool that slipped at 40 feet was not an inconvenience. It was a death sentence. A pair of pliers that lost its grip on a live conductor was not a warranty claim. It was a funeral. Klein pliers became the standard not because of advertising. There was no advertising. They became the standard because linemen trusted them with their lives, and the tools earned that trust 1 shift at a time, 1 pole at a time, 1 winter at a time. Mathias Klein died in 1897. He was 71 years old. He had spent 40 years forging pliers for the men who built America's communication and electrical infrastructure. His son took over the company. The product line remained the same. Pliers, tools for the men who worked with wire. The company did not pivot into consumer goods. It did not chase the hardware store shelf. It stayed where it had always been, inside the tool belt of a professional tradesperson. The early 20th century tested that focus. 2 world wars reshaped American manufacturing. During World War I, electrical infrastructure became a military priority. Communications lines had to be strung across battlefields. Signal Corps needed tools that worked in mud, rain, and freezing trenches. Klein supplied pliers to the US military. The same tools that American linemen trusted on domestic poles were now being used by signal operators in France. World War II accelerated the demand again. Military bases needed wiring. Shipyards needed electrical systems. Aircraft factories needed power. The arsenal of democracy ran on electricity, and the electricity ran on wire, and the wire was handled by men carrying Klein pliers. The company produced tools for the war effort while maintaining its civilian supply. When the war ended, the men came home, and many of them went into the electrical trades that were about to build the post-war American suburb. The Rural Electrification Administration, created in 1935, had already begun bringing power to farms and small towns that had never had it. By 1939, only 25% of American farms had electricity. By 1950, more than 90% did. The transformation required hundreds of thousands of miles of new power lines. Every mile required linemen. Every lineman needed pliers. Klein supplied them. The company was now in its third generation of family ownership. The factory was still in Chicago. The workforce was American, the steel was American. The forging, the machining, the heat treatment, the finishing, all of it happened in the same city where Mathias Klein had repaired a broken pair of pliers for a telegraph worker nearly a century earlier. The fourth generation took over, then the fifth. Each transition was quiet, no press releases, no management consultants, no restructuring. The son replaced the father, the grandson replaced the son. The company kept making pliers. It expanded into screwdrivers, wire strippers, cable cutters, fish tapes, multimeters, and other tools for the electrical trade. But every new product served the same customer. The person working with wire, the person on the pole in the trench, inside the panel, behind the wall. Klein did not make tools for woodworkers. It did not make tools for plumbers, for mechanics, for general contractors. It made tools for electricians and linemen. That was the entire market. That was the entire identity. The American power tool industry spent the second half of the 20th century consolidating. Brands that had been independent for decades were bought, sold, merged, and restructured by corporations and private equity firms that understood balance sheets better than they understood tools. Black & Decker acquired McCulloch in 1973 and turned a professional chainsaw company into a consumer appliance line. Stanley merged with Black & Decker in 2010 and began absorbing every brand it could reach. Craftsman was sold by a dying Sears in 2017. Porter Cable was acquired by Pentair, then by Black & Decker, then killed by Stanley Black & Decker. Milwaukee was sold to Amstar, then to Atlas Copco, then to a Hong Kong conglomerate called TTI. Rigid was sold to Emerson Electric, then licensed to TTI. Hitachi Koki was bought by KKR and renamed Metabo HPT. Hilti locked itself in a family trust specifically to prevent exactly this kind of acquisition. The pattern was consistent. A private equity firm or a conglomerate would acquire a tool brand. The first move was to cut manufacturing costs. Production moved overseas. The second move was to reduce engineering investment. The tools got cheaper to make and cheaper to use. The third move was to extract brand equity, selling the name on products that had nothing in common with the ones that built the reputation. The fourth move was to sell the hollowed-out brand to the next buyer and take the profit. Brand after brand went through this cycle. The names survived, the tools behind the names did not. Klein never entered the cycle. The company was never sold. It was never acquired. It was never merged. It was never leveraged. It was never taken public. No private equity firm ever owned a share of Klein Tools. No conglomerate ever put Klein's name on a product Klein did not design, engineer, and manufacture. 5 generations of the Klein family have run the company. The current leadership represents the 5th generation of direct family ownership and management. The company has never had an outside CEO. It has never answered to a board of directors appointed by institutional shareholders. It has never reported quarterly earnings to Wall Street analysts who would demand that the engineering budget be cut to improve margins for the next 90 days. The question that every business school case study asks about Klein is the obvious one. How did they resist? The tool industry in the late 20th and early 21st century was a feeding frenzy. Every brand with a recognizable name was a target. The acquisition offers came. They always come. A family-owned company with strong brand recognition and steady revenue in a professional trade is exactly the kind of asset that a private equity firm values most. Predictable cash flows, low customer acquisition costs, a name that sells itself. The playbook is simple. Buy the company for 8 to 12 times earnings. Cut the manufacturing costs by moving production to a lower-cost country. Reduce the workforce. Trim the engineering staff. Sell the company in 3 to 5 years for 15 to 20 times the reduced cost base. The profit is in the extraction, not in the product. Klein said no repeatedly across decades. The family chose to keep the company private, to keep the manufacturing in the United States, and to keep the product line focused on the same customer it had served since 1857. The cost of that decision was real. Manufacturing in the United States is more expensive than manufacturing in China. American steel costs more than imported steel. American labor costs more than offshore labor. Every pair of Klein pliers that comes off the line in the United States costs more to produce than it would cost if the same tool were forged in Guangdong or Taipei. Klein absorbs that cost. It does not pass all of it to the customer. It accepts a lower margin per unit than it could achieve by offshoring. And it keeps the factory running in the country where the tools are used. Today, Klein Tools manufactures primarily in the United States. The company operates plants in Illinois, Texas, and other domestic locations. Not every single Klein product is made in America. Some components and some product lines are sourced internationally. And the company is transparent about which items carry the Made in USA designation. But the core hand tools, the pliers, the screwdrivers, the strippers, the products that built the brand, are forged, machined, and assembled in American factories by American workers. That is not a marketing slogan. It is a manufacturing decision that the company makes every year, every quarter, every time a cheaper alternative is available, and the family chooses not to take it. There is a culture around Klein Tools that does not exist around most tool brands, and it is worth understanding because it explains why the company has survived 5 generations without selling. Electrical linemen and electricians are not casual tool buyers. They are professionals who work with equipment that can kill them. A lineman working on a 13,800-volt distribution line does not buy tools based on price. He buys tools based on trust. The pliers he uses to grip a conductor must not slip. The screwdriver he uses inside a live panel must be properly insulated. The wire strippers he uses must cut cleanly without nicking the conductor, because a nicked conductor is a hotspot, and a hotspot is a fire. The relationship between a lineman and his Klein pliers is not brand loyalty in the consumer sense. It is not the same thing as preferring one brand of running shoe over another. It is closer to the relationship between a climber and a rope. The tool is a life safety device. The trust is earned over years of use in conditions that expose every flaw. Consider storm work. When a hurricane, an ice storm, or a tornado takes down power lines across a region, utility companies mobilize linemen from across the country. These crews drive hundreds of miles to work 16-hour shifts in conditions that are dangerous in daylight and lethal in the dark. They are restoring power to hospitals, water treatment plants, and homes where people are waiting in the cold. They work on damaged poles near downed conductors in wind and rain and standing water. The tools they carry into that environment are the tools they trust absolutely. They do not experiment with a new brand during a storm restoration. They carry what they know. For the majority of American linemen, what they know is Klein. The apprenticeship system reinforces this. A first-year apprentice lineman learns the trade from a journeyman who has been climbing for 10 or 20 or 30 years. The journeyman carries Klein pliers. The apprentice buys Klein pliers. The recommendation is not casual. It is handed down with the same seriousness as every other piece of knowledge that keeps a person alive on a pole. Which way to position the body relative to the conductor. How to test for voltage before touching anything. Where to place the protective grounds and what tools to carry when the stakes are measured in amperes and gravity. The tool is part of the curriculum. It is passed forward the way a craft tradition passes forward anything that has proven itself under pressure. Not through advertising, through survival. Klein has maintained that trust by doing something that sounds simple but is extraordinarily difficult in practice. It has kept the quality consistent across generations. A pair of Klein Lineman's pliers purchased in 2026 performs to the same standard as a pair purchased in 1990 or 1970 or 1950. The steel is high carbon, the heat treatment is precise, the pivot is tight, the cutting edges are induction hardened. The handles are shaped for the lineman's grip, not for a retail display. This consistency is what offshoring destroys. When a manufacturer moves production from a domestic forge to an overseas contract manufacturer, the first thing that changes is the steel. Then the tolerances, then the heat treatment, then the fit. The tool still looks the same. The packaging still carries the same logo. But the mechanic who has used the brand for 20 years can feel the difference the first time he picks it up. The jaw is slightly loose. The cut is slightly rough. The handle flex is wrong. The tool is not the same tool. It carries the same name, but the name no longer means what it used to mean. Klein has not made that trade. The pliers feel the same because they are made the same, in the same country with the same standards, by a company that answers to the same family that has owned it for 167 years. The modern electrical trade is not the trade it was in 1857. A 21st century electrician works with fiber optic cable, data networking, solar panel arrays, electric vehicle charging stations, smart building automation, and battery storage systems. The tools have changed accordingly. Klein now manufactures over 4,000 products across categories that Mathias Klein could not have imagined. Laser levels, thermal imagers, digital clamp meters, modular crimping systems, insulated hand tools rated for 1,000 volts, cable pulling equipment for runs that stretch hundreds of feet through commercial buildings. But the core product, the tool that started everything, is still there. The Klein D2000 series Lineman's pliers, a pair of side-cutting pliers with a high-leverage pivot, cross-hatched knurled jaws, induction-hardened cutting knives, and a hot riveted joint. The design has been refined over 167 years. The fundamental concept has not changed. A tool for gripping, twisting, and cutting wire, built for the hand of a person who works above the ground in conditions that punish every weakness in the metal. The D2000-9NE is the current flagship, 9¼ inches. High leverage design. The jaw geometry provides 46% more gripping power than standard pliers at the same handle force. The cutting knives handle ACSR wire, the aluminum conductor steel reinforced cable used in overhead power transmission. The tool is made in the United States. Klein does not license its name to other manufacturers. Klein does not sell through mass market retailers in the way that consumer brands do. Klein sells through electrical distributors, through supply houses, through the same kind of specialist channel that Mathias Klein sold through when the customer came to his shop and described the problem. The distribution is narrower than Home Depot. The customer is more specific. The relationship is more direct. A professional electrician does not browse an aisle looking for Klein. He walks into an electrical supply house and asks for the tool by catalogue number. He knows the number because his journeyman told him the number, or because he has been ordering the same tool for 15 years, or because the supply house counterman, who is himself a former electrician, recommends it the same way he was taught to recommend it. The sales channel is the trade itself. The distribution network is the profession. Klein does not run television commercials. It does not sponsor stadium naming rights. It does not pay social media influencers to hold its pliers in front of a camera. It does not need to. The tool sells because the tool works, and the people who use it tell other people who use it. And the chain has not broken since 1857. In an industry where nearly every historic tool brand has been acquired, restructured, offshored, and resold, Klein Tools remains what it was in 1857. A family-owned American manufacturer that makes tools for people who work with wire. It has not been sold to a conglomerate. It has not been taken public. It has not been strip-mined by private equity. It has not moved its factories to China to improve quarterly margins for shareholders it does not have. It has not put its name on products it did not build. While Stanley Black and Decker accumulated brands like inventory, buying Craftsman, buying Porter Cable, buying DeWalt, buying Irwin, buying Lennox, and managing them as line items on a corporate spreadsheet, Klein kept making pliers. While TTI acquired Milwaukee and Ryobi and Rigid and turned a portfolio of brand names into a Hong Kong conglomerate's revenue engine, Klein kept forging steel in Illinois. While Sears bled Craftsman dry and sold the corpse for $900 million, Klein kept answering to the family whose name is on the building. The company did not do anything dramatic to survive. It did not make a brilliant strategic pivot. It did not reinvent its business model. It did not hire a celebrity CEO or launch a direct-to-consumer app or run a Super Bowl advertisement. It made the same decision, year after year, generation after generation, for 167 years. Stay private, stay focused, stay in the trade. Build what the professional needs. Build it where the professional works. Do not sell. There is a word for what Klein has done that business schools rarely use because it does not fit neatly into a case study framework. The word is restraint. The restraint to not diversify into products the company does not understand. The restraint to not chase consumer markets that would dilute the professional identity. The restraint to not accept an acquisition offer that would make one generation of the family wealthy at the cost of everything every previous generation built. The restraint to keep manufacturing in a country where manufacturing is more expensive, because the alternative is to become the kind of company that Klein's own customers have learned to distrust. Every tool brand that was sold, offshored, and hollowed out was sold by someone who decided that the money on the table was worth more than the company on the floor. Klein's family has looked at that table for 5 generations and walked away from it every time. Mathias Klein forged his first pair of pliers because a lineman brought a broken tool to his shop and needed it fixed. The lineman did not care about brand strategy. He did not care about market positioning. He did not care about shareholder value or quarterly earnings or acquisition multiples. He cared about one thing. Would the tool hold when he was 40 feet in the air with a live wire in his hand? That question has not changed in 167 years. The men and women who climb poles and pull wire and terminate panels and energize circuits still ask it every morning when they open their tool bags. And for 167 years, 5 generations of one family have answered it the same way. By forging steel, by holding the standard, and by refusing to let anyone else answer it for them. That is not a corporate strategy. That is a blacksmith's promise made in 1857, kept every day since. The pliers still hold, the family still forges, the grid still runs, and the company that started with one broken tool and one man's refusal to let it stay broken is still here, still private, still American, still making the tool that built the power grid one connection at a time.